It's a thought that counts, Zero. Thanks for thinking about it. Zero, do you speak Spanish? Test. Okay, you should be able to hear me. It's time for terrorism, you're silly. Baxter, you know I don't speak Spanish and English. No, no. Sadly, his English is not very strong. Yeah, see, he said doesn't know how to speak English. All right, giving you guys just a minute. You ate a whole real cheese and pooped in the refrigerator. I'm not mad. I'm impressed. Yeah, I would be pissed. For one, I love cheese. Damn, my phone doesn't know what that means. Alrighty. Shouldn't need my keyboard. So I'll plug it into charge for a little bit while we read. Oops. Shit. There we go. Turn that off. Might need to raise my mic volume, but my mic volume should be fine. I turned it up just a little, though. Anyway, Zero, do you speak Spanish? I have a fellow from, I believe he said Mexico, in my YouTube chat, and he doesn't speak English very well, if at all. But he tries to be communicative. And for some reason, he keeps doing end things. The ends with the little wavy thing on top. Okay. You guys hear me okay? Looks like it's getting loud enough. Okay. You should be able to see his chats now. Holy shit, why does that take up so much space on the screen? Damn it. I would very much not like that. Whatever. So that you guys can hear my music. There we go. I like that better. Okay, then. You cut your hair today. Congratulations. How does it feel? You call it an underfade? What's that mean? 22 pages. We can do that. Do you remember what I told you? I was going to bring a Cuban friend. What do you think or want to come? Well, don't blame him. The guy has a life. Ah. Your friend? Yeah, I get it. People's lives. Can't blame them. Let me turn this up a little more. I'm going to check the sound balance real quick. So you're not going to hear the music for a minute. All right, I suppose I better talk or I'm not going to be able to check anything, huh? Yeah, that looks like it's feeding. I guess that could be a little louder. All right, just another moment. Hey, Jack, how you doing? Good to see you. We'll be starting the story in just a minute. Maybe a little more. I gotta make sure I get the... I want to be loud, but not too loud. $50-50. That sucks. Oops. DMV in the AM. I'm going to sleep. Dropping a like, which everyone here should have done already, right? Yes. Everybody, listen to Sleazy and like, please. All right, let's bring back the music. And now we're going to start the story. Let me take a sip of this here honey or tea first. Hopefully it's still hot. Yep, it is. And it still tastes nasty. Oh boy. That tea. Hey, Mr. Gregory, how you doing, man? Yeah, why would you be at 121? All right, that should get it back up. Okay, here we go. The long conversation of Zamakona and his visitors took place in the green-blue twilight of the grove just outside the temple door. Some of the men reclined on the weeds and moss beside the half-finished walk, while others, including the Spaniard and the chief spokesman of the Zath party, sat on the occasional low monolithic pillars that lined the temple approach. Almost a whole terrestrial day must have been consumed in the colloquy for Zamacona felt the need of food several times and ate from his well-stocked pack, while some of the Sath party went back for provisions to the roadway, where they had left the animals on which they had ridden. At length, the prime leader of the party brought the discourse to a close and indicated that the time had come to proceed to the city. There were, he affirmed, several extra beasts in the cavalcade, upon one of which Zamacona could ride. The prospect of mounting one of those ominous hybrid entities whose fabled nourishment was so alarming, and a single sight of which had sent charging buffalo into such a frenzy of flight, was by no means reassuring to the traveler. There was, moreover, another point about the things which disturbed him greatly. Their apparently preternatural intelligence, which some members of the previous day's roving pack had reported his presence, to the men of Sath, and brought out the present expedition. But Zamacona was not a coward, hence followed the men boldly down the weed-grown walk toward the road where the things were stationed. And yet he could not refrain from crying out in terror at what he saw when he passed through the great vine-draped pylons and emerged upon the ancient road. He did not wonder that the curious Wichita had fled in panic and had to close his eyes a moment to retain his sanity. It is unfortunate that some sense of pious reticence prevented him from describing fully in his manuscript the nameless sight he saw. As it is, he merely hinted at the shockingly morbidity of these great floundering white things with black fur on their backs, a rudimentary horn in the center of their forehead, and an unmistakable trace of human or anthropoid blood in their flat-nosed, bulging-lipped faces. They were, he declared later in the manuscript, the most terrible, objective entities he ever saw in his life, either in Kinyan or in the outer world. And the specific quality of their supreme terror was something apart from any easily recognizable or describable feature. The main trouble was that they were not wholly products of nature. The party observed Zamacona's fright and hastened to reassure him as much as possible. The beasts, or Giayoth, they explained, surely were curious things, but were really very harmless. The flesh they ate was not that of intelligent people of the master race, but merely that of a special slave class, which had for the most part ceased to be thoroughly human, and which indeed was the primal meat stock of Kinyan. They, or their principal ancestral element, had first been found in a wild state amidst the Cyclopean ruins of the deserted red-litten world of Yoth, which lay below the blue-litten world of Kinyan. The part of them was human seemed quite clear, but men of science could never decide whether they were actually the descendants of the bygone entities who had lived and reigned in the strange ruins. The chief ground for such a supposition the chief ground for such a supposition was the well-known fact that the vanished inhabitants of Yoth had been quadrupedal. This much was known from the very few manuscripts and carvings found in the vaults of Zin, beneath the largest ruined city of Yoth. But it was also known from these manuscripts that the beings of Yoth had possessed the art of synthetically creating life, and had made and destroyed several different efficiently designed races of industrial and transportational animals in the course of their history, to say nothing of concocting all manner of fantastic living shapes for the sake of amusement and new sensations during the long period of decadence. The beings of Yoth had undoubtedly been reptilian in affiliation, with most physiologists of Sath agreed that the present beasts had been very much inclined towards reptilianism before they had been crossed with the mammal slave class of Kinyan. It argues well for the intrepid fire of those of those Renaissance Spaniards who conquered half the known world that Pamphilio de Zamacona y Núñez actually mounted one of the morbid beasts of Sath and fell into place beside the leader of the cavalcade, the man named Lilhalf who had been most active in the previous exchange of information. It was a repulsive business, but after all, the seat was very easy, and the gait of the clumsy Guignonoth surprisingly even and regular. No saddle was necessary, and the animal appeared to require no guidance whatsoever. The procession moved forward at a brisk gait, stopping only at certain abandoned cities and temples about which Zamacona was curious, and which Glilhothnian had obligingly ready to display and explain. The largest of these towns, Borgra, was a marvel of finely wrought gold, and Zamacona studied the curiously ornate architecture with avid interest. Buildings tended towards height and slenderness, with roofs bursting into a multitude of pinnacles. The streets were narrow, curving, and occasionally picturesquely hilly. But Gilhoff-Yun said that the later cities of Kenyan were far more spacious and regular in design. All these old cities of the plain shewed traces of level walls, reminders of the archaic days when they had been successfully conquered by the now dispersed armies of Sath. There was one object along the route which Gilhoth-Yun exhibited on his own initiative, even though it involved a detour of about a mile along a vine-tangled side path. This was a squat, plain temple of black basalt rock blocks without a single carving, and containing only a vacant onyx pedestal. The remarkable thing about it was its story, for it was a link with a fabled elder world, compared to which even cryptic Yoth was a thing of yesterday. It had been built in imitation of certain temples depicted in the vaults of Zin, to house a very terrible black-toed idol found in the red-litten world and called Sithoga in the Yothic manuscripts. It had been a potent and widely worshipped god, and after its adoption by the people of Kenyan, had lent its name to the city which was later to become dominant in that region. Yothic legend said that it had come from a mysterious inner realm beneath the red-litten world, a black realm of peculiarly sensed beings which had no light at all, but which had had great civilizations and mighty gods before ever the reptilian quadrupeds of Yoth had come into being. Many images of Tsothoga existed in Yoth, all of which were alleged to have come from the black inner realm, and which were supposed by Yothic archaeologists to represent the aeon extinct race of that realm. The black realm, called Nakai in the Yothic manuscripts, had been explored as thoroughly as possible by these archaeologists, and singular stone troughs or burrows had excited infinite speculations. When the men of Kianyan discovered the red-litten world and deciphered its strange manuscripts, they took over the Sothoga cult and brought all the frightful toad images up to the land of blue light, housing them in shrines of Yoth-quarried basalt like the one Zamacona now saw. The cult flourished until it almost rivaled the ancient cults of Yig and Thulu, and one branch of the race even took it to the outer world, where the smallest of the images eventually found at a shrine at Oletho in the land of Lomar, near the Earth's North Pole. It was rumored that this outer world cult survived even after the Great Ice Sheet and the hairy Nopex destroyed Lomar, but of such matters was not much was definitely known in Kenyan. In that world of blue light, the cult came to an abrupt end, even though the name of Sath was suffered to remain. What ended the cult was the partial exploration of the black realm of Nakai beneath the red-litten world of Yoth. According to the Yothic manuscripts, there was no surviving life in Nakai, but something must have happened in the eons between the days of Yoth and the coming of men to Earth. Something, perhaps, not unconnected with the end of Yoth. Perhaps it had been an earthquake, opening up lower chambers in the lightless world which had been closed against the Yothic archaeologists. Or perhaps something more perhaps some more frightful juxtaposition of energy and electrons, wholly inconceivable to any sort of vertebrate mind, had taken place. At any rate, when the men of Kinyan went down into Nakai's black abyss with their great atom power searchlights, they found living things that oozed along stone channels and worshipped onyx and basalt images of Sothoga. But they were not toads like Sothoga himself. Far worse, they were amorphous lumps of viscous black slime that took temporary shapes for various purposes. The explorers of Kinyan did not pause for detailed observation, and those who escaped alive sealed the passage leading from red-litten Yoth down into the gulfs of nether horror. Then all the images of Thoga in the land of Kinyan were dissolved into ether by disintegrating rays, and the cult was abolished forever. Hey, Jock. Eons later, when naive fears were outgrown and supplanted by scientific curiosity, the old legends of Thoga and Nakai were recalled, and a suitably armed and equipped exploring party went down to Yoth to find the closed gate of the Black Abyss and see what might still lie beneath. But they could not find the gate, nor could any man ever do so in all the ages that followed. Nowadays, there were those who doubted that any abyss had ever existed, but the few scholars who could still decipher the Yothic manuscripts believed that the evidence for such things was adequate, even though the middle records of Kinyan, with accounts of one frightful expedition to Nakai, were more open to question. Some of the later religious cults tried to suppress remembrance of Nakai's existence and attached severe penalties to its mention, but these did not begin to be taken seriously at the time of Zamakona's advent to Kinyan. As the cavalcade returned to the old highway and approached the low range of mountains, Zamakona saw that the river was very close on the left. Somewhat later, as the terrain rose, the stream entered a gorge and passed through the hills, while the road traversed the gap at a rather higher level close to the brink. It was about this time that light rainfall came. Zamakona noticed the occasional drops and drizzles, and looked at the coruscating blue air, and there was no diminution of the strange radiance. Gilhath-Yun then told him that such condensation and precipitation of water vapor were not uncommon, and that they never dimmed the glare of the vault above. A kind of mist, indeed, always hung about the lowlands of Kinyan, and compensated for the complete absence of true clouds. The slight rise of the mountain pass enabled Zamakona, by looking behind, to see the ancient and deserted plain in panorama as he had seen it from the other side. He seems to have appreciated its strange beauty, and to have vaguely regretted leaving it, for he speaks of being urged by Gilhath-Yun to drive his beast more rapidly. When he faced frontward again, he saw that the crest of the road was very near, the weed-grown way leading up starkly and ending against a blank void of blue light. The scene was undoubtedly highly impressive. A steep green mountain wall on the right, a deep river chasm on the left, with another green mountain wall beyond it. And ahead, the churning blue sea of blue coruscations into which the upward path dissolved. Then came the crest itself, and with it the world of Seth outspread in a stupendous forward vista. Zamacona caught his breath at the great sweep of peopled landscape, for it was a hive of settlement and activity beyond anything he had ever seen or dreamed of. The downward slope of the hill itself was relatively thinly strewn, with small farms and occasional temples, but beyond it lay an enormous plain covered like a chessboard with planted trees, irrigated by narrow canals cut from the river, and threaded by wide, geometrically precise roads of gold or black or basalt blocks. Great silver cables borne aloft on golden pillars linked the low, spreading buildings and clusters of buildings which rose here and there, and in some places one could see lines of partly ruinous pillars without cables. Moving objects shewed the field to be under tillage, and in some cases Zamacona saw that men were plowing with the aid of the repulsive half-human quadrupeds. But the most impressive of all was the bewildering vision of clustered spires and pinnacles which rose far off across the plain and shimmered flower-like and spectral in the coruscating blue light. At first Zamacona thought it was a mountain covered with houses and temples, like some of the picturesque hills of his own Spain, but a second glance shewed him that it was not indeed such. It was a city of the plain, but fashioned of such heaven-reaching towers that its outline was truly that of a mountain. Above it hung a curious grayish haze, through which the blue light glistened and took added overtones of radiance from the million golden minarets. Glancing at Gilhath-Yin, Zamacona knew that this was the monstrous, gigantic, and omnipotent city of Sath. The road turned downward towards the plain. Zamacona felt a kind of uneasiness and sense of evil. He did not like the beast he rode, or the world that could provide such a beast, and he did not like the atmosphere that brooded over the distant city of Sath. When the cavalcade began to pass occasional farms, the Spaniard noticed the forms that worked the fields, and did not like their motions and proportions, or the mutilations he saw on most of them. Moreover, he did not like the way that some of these forms were herded into corrals, or the way they grazed on the heavy verdure. I'm going to have to look that one up later. Gilhath-Yin indicated that these beings were members of the slave class, and that their acts were controlled by the master of the farm, who gave them hypnotic impressions in the morning of all they were to do during the day. As semi-unconscious machines, their industrial efficiency was nearly perfect. Those in the corrals were inferior specimens, classified merely as livestock. It is a very weird word, Jack. Upon reaching the plain, Zamacona saw the large farms and noticed the almost human work performed by the repulsive horned Gyunyoth. Whatever. He likewise observed more man-like shapes that toiled along the furrows, and felt a curious fright and disgust toward certain of them whose motions were more mechanical than those of the rest. These, Gilhath-Yin explained, were what the men called organisms which had died, but which had been mechanically reanimated for industrial purposes by means of atomic energy and thought power. The slave class did not share the immortality of the freemen of Sath, so that with time the number of Yumbia had become very large. They were dog-like and faithful, but not so readily amenable to thought commands as the living slaves. Those which most repelled Zamacona were those whose mutilations were greatest, for some were wholly headless, while others had suffered singular and seemingly capricious subtractions, distortions, transpositions, and graftings in various places. The Spaniard could not account for these conditions, but Gilhath-Yin made it clear that These were slaves who had been used for amusement of the people in some vast arenas, for the men of Sath were connoisseurs of delicate sensation, and required a constant supply of fresh, novel stimuli for their jaded impulses. Zamacona, though by no means squeamish, was not favorably impressed by what he saw and heard. Approached more closely, the vast metropolis became dimly horrible in its monstrous extent and inhuman height. Gilhathien explained that the upper parts of the great towers were no longer used, and that many had been taken down to avoid the bother of maintenance. The plain around the original urban area was covered with newer and smaller dwellings, many which in many cases were preferred to the ancient towers. From the whole mass of gold and stone, a monstrous roar of activity droned outward over the plain, while cavalcades and streams of wagons were constantly entering and leaving over the great gold or stone-paved roads. Several times Gilhathien paused to shew Zamacona some particular object of interest, especially the temples of Yig, Tulu, Nug, Yeb, and the not-to-be-named one, which lined the road at infrequent intervals, each in its embowering grove, according to the custom of Kinyan. These temples, unlike those of the deserted plain beyond the mountains, were still in active use. Large parties of mounted worshippers coming and going in constant streams. Gilhathien took Zamacona into each of them, and the Spaniard watched the subtle orgastic rites with fascination and repulsion. The ceremonies of Nug and Yeb sickened him especially, so much, indeed, that he refrained from describing them in his manuscript. One squat black temple of Sithoga was encountered, but it had been turned into a shrine of Shub-Niggurath, the all-mother and wife of the not-to-be-named one. This deity was a kind of sophisticated Astarte, and her worship struck the pious Catholic as supremely obnoxious. What he liked least of all were the emotional sounds emitted by the celebrants, jarring sounds in a race that had ceased to use vocal speech for ordinary purposes. Close to the compact outskirts of Sath, and well within the shadow of its terrifying towers, Gilhathien pointed out a monstrous circular building before which enormous crowds were lined up. This, he indicated, was one of many amphitheaters where curious sports and sensations were provided for the weary people of Kinyan. He was about to pause and usher Zamacona inside the vast curved facade when the Spaniard, recalling the mutilated forms he had seen in the fields, violently demurred. This was the first of those friendly clashes of taste which were to convince the people of Sath that their guest followed strange and narrow standards. Hey, Dave. Sath itself was a network of strange and ancient streets, and despite a growing sense of horror and alienage, Zamacona was enthralled by its imitation of mystery and cosmic wonder. The dizzy giganticism of its overawing towers, the monstrous surge of teeming life through its ornate avenues, the curious carvings on the doorways and windows, the odd vistas glimpsed from balustraded plazas and tiers of tightened terraces. Say that 3 times fast. And the enveloping gray haze which seemed to press down on the gorge-like streets in low-ceiling fashion, all combined to produce such a sense of adventurous expectancy as he had never known before. He was taken at once to a council of executives which held forth in a gold and copper palace behind a gardened and fountained park, and was for some time subject to close, friendly questioning in a vaulted hall frescoed with vertiginous arabesques. Much was expected of him, he could see, in the way of historical information about the outside earth, but in return all the mysteries of Kinyan would be unveiled to him. The one great drawback was the inexorable ruling that he might never return to the world of sun and stars and Spain, which was his. A daily program was laid down for the visitor, with time apportioned judiciously among several kinds of activities. There would be conversations with persons of learning in various places, and lessons in the many branches of Satthic lore. Liberal periods of research were allowed for, and all the libraries of Kinyan, both secular and sacred, were to be thrown open to him as soon as he might master the written languages. Rites and spectacles were to be attended, except where he might especially object. And much time would be left for the enlightened pleasure-seeking and emotional titillation which formed the goal and nucleus of daily life. A house in the suburbs or an apartment in the city would be assigned him, and he would be initiated into one of the large affection groups, including many noble women of the most extreme and art-enhanced beauty, which in latter-day Kinyan took place of family units. Several horned Yunyoth would be provided for his transportation and errand running, and 10 living slaves of intact body would serve to conduct his establishment and protect him from thieves and sadists and religious orgiasts on the public highways. Shit, I lost my place on the public highways. Where's the public highways? There it is. There were many mechanical devices which he must learn to use, but Gilhath Yun would instruct him immediately regarding the principal ones. Upon his choosing an apartment in preference to a suburban villa, Zamacona was dismissed by the executives with great courtesy and ceremony, and was led through the several gorgeous streets to a cliff-like carven structure of some 70 or 80 floors. Preparations for his arrival had already been instituted. In a spacious ground floor suite of vaulted rooms, slaves were busy adjusting, hanging, and furnishing. God damn it, I'm going to try that again. Preparations for his arrival had already been instituted, and in a spacious ground floor suite of vaulted rooms, slaves were busy adjusting hangings and furniture. There were lacquered and inlaid tabourets, velvet and silk reclining corners, and squatting cushions, and infinite rows of teakwood and ebony pigeonholes with metal cylinders containing some of the manuscripts he was to soon read. Standard classics which all urban apartments possessed. Desks with a great stack of membrane paper and pots of the prevailing green pigment were in every room, each with graded sets of pigment brushes and other odd bits of stationery. Mechanical writing devices stood on ornate golden tripods, while over all was shed a brilliant blue light from energy globes set in the ceiling. There were windows, but at this shadowy ground level, they were of scant illuminating value. In some of the rooms were elaborate baths, while the kitchen was a maze of technical contrivances. Supplies were brought, Zamacona was told, through the network of underground passages which lay beneath Sath, and which had once accommodated curious mechanical transporters. There was a stable on the ground level for the beasts, and Zamacona would presently be shewn how to find the nearest runway to the street. Before his inspection was finished, the permanent staff of slaves arrived and were introduced, and shortly afterward there came some half-dozen freemen and noblewomen of his future affection group, who were to be his companions for several days, contributing what they could to his instruction and amusement. Upon their departure, another party would take their place, and so onward in rotation through a group of about 50 members. Thus was Pamphilio de Zamacona Nunez absorbed for 4 years of his life, for 4 years into the life of the sinister city of Sath in the blue-lit netherworld of Kinyan. All that he learned and saw and did is clearly not told in his manuscript, for a pious reticence came over him when he began to write in his native Spanish tongue, and he dared not set everything down. He consistently viewed with repulsion, and many things he steadfastly refrained from seeing or doing or eating. For other things he atoned by frequently counting the beads of his rosary. He explored the entire world of Kinyan, including the deserted machine cities of the Middle Period on the gorse-grown plain of Nith, and made one descent into the red-litten world of Yoth to see the Cyclopean ruins. He witnessed prodigies of craft and machinery which left him breathless, and beheld human metamorphoses, dematerializations, rematerializations, and reanimations which made him cross himself again and again. His very capacity for astonishment was blunted by the plethora of new marvels which every day brought him. But the longer he stayed, the more he wished to leave, for the inner life of Kinyan was based on impulses very plainly outside his radius. As he progressed in historical knowledge, he understood more, but understanding only heightened his distaste. He felt that the people of Sath were a lost and dangerous race, more dangerous to themselves than they knew, and that their growing frenzy of monotony warfare and novelty quest was leading them rapidly towards a precipice of disintegration and utter horror. His own visit, he could see, had accelerated their unrest, not only by introducing fears of outside invaders, but by exciting in many ways a wish to sally forth and taste the diverse external world he described. As time progressed, he noticed an increasing tendency of the people to resort to dematerialization as amusement, so that the apartments and amphitheaters of Sath became a veritable witch's sabbath of transmutations, age adjustments, death experiments, and projections. With the growth of boredom and restlessness, he saw cruelty and subtlety and revolt were growing apace. There were more and more cosmic abnormality, more and more curious sadism, more and more ignorance and superstition, and more desire to escape out of physical life into a half-spectral state of electronic dispersion. All of his efforts to leave, however, came to nothing. Persuasion was useless, as repeated trials proved, though the mature disillusion of the upper class at first prevented them from resenting their guests' open wish for departure. In a year, which he had reckoned as 1543, Zamacona made an actual attempt to escape through the tunnel by which he had entered Kinyan. But after a weary journey across the deserted plains, he encountered forces in the dark passage which discouraged him from further attempts in that direction. As a means of sustaining hope and keeping the image of home in his mind, he began about this time to make rough draughts of the manuscript relating to his adventures, delighting in the loved old Spanish words and the familiar letters of the Roman alphabet. Somehow he fancied he might get the manuscript to the outer world, and to make it convincing to his fellows to resolve to enclose it in one of the And to make it convincing to his fellows, he resolved to enclose it in one of the Tulu metal cylinders used for sacred archives. There we go. That alien magnetic substance could not but support the incredible story he had to tell. But even as he planned, he had little real hope of ever establishing contact with the Earth's surface. Every known gate, he knew, was guarded by persons or forces that it were better not to oppose. His attempts at escape had not helped matters, for he could now see a growing hostility in the outer world he represented. He hoped that no other Europeans would find his way in, for it was possible that latecomers might not fare as well as he. He himself had been a cherished fountain of data, and as such enjoyed a privileged status. Others, deemed less necessary, might receive rather different treatment. He even wondered what would happen to him when the sages of Seth considered him drained dry of fresh facts, and in self defense began to be more gradual in his talks on earth lore, conveying whenever he could the impression of vast knowledge held in reserve. One other thing which endangered Zamakona's status in Seth was his persistent curiosity regarding the untimely abyss of Nakai, or regarding the ultimate abyss of the Nakai, beneath Redlit and Yoth, whose existence the dominant religious cults of Kinyan were more and more inclined to deny. When exploring Yoth, he had vainly tried to find the blocked up entrance, and later on he experimented in arts of dematerialization and projection, hoping that he might thereby be able to throw his consciousness downward into the gulfs which his physical eyes could not discover. Hold on, let me check something. Because there is no reason it should seem low. Not that one. That one. Okay, am I blowing your ears out? Let me know if I need to turn it back, if I need to turn up or down, or because I just had to, there's a setting in my background that for some reason keeps getting turned down to 43 when I keep it at 100. Now you have no sound? What? That makes no sense. You should still have sound. Oh no, the sound's back. Okay. How about now? Low sound on Twitch too? Yeah, I know it's my end. Hold on. I have no idea why that keeps adjusting itself the way it does. I just want that to stay where it goes. How's that? Is it too loud? I'm not going to touch anything for a minute. Loud, then dropped again. What the fuck? Seriously, I would like this to stay exactly where I put it. Aha, so now I'm talking and it adjusts itself. It's adjusting itself again. As I sit here talking, it's adjusting itself. Why? I don't want you to be down there. I want you to be up here. Yeah, I see what's happening. I've got my background sound. Oh, that's the problem, is it turns itself down consistently. It's trying to take over. Hold on. Damn it, I need my keyboard. Okay, so when you right click on your little speaker there in the lower right, and go to sounds and then go to properties. It's not what I'm streaming with. It's the actual settings in Microsoft. That's what I'm telling you. Go to properties, then go to the microphone property, and then go to levels. It keeps dropping it down. Gotta figure out why that's happening. Okay. Oh, maybe that's what I need to do. Let's try that. No, that's clicked. I'm listening to this device. I don't want to do that. Let's see here. Try that. See if it's happening again. I know it's going to be loud. That's probably really loud. Sorry, guys. I don't want you to turn down. Why are you doing that? All right, let's test that. Let's see if it goes down now. And there it goes again. What the hell? I'm not using Steam. Sorry, Ingle. All right. I don't care about Skype. It's not a Skype issue. It's not a Steam issue. Interesting. Yeah, Microsoft is fucking with me. Okay. Let's see here. Thank you for letting me know, guys. I appreciate it. All right, so that's all that does. Go to the recording tab, select the microphone, untick, click apply. Sound window. Yeah, that makes no sense. Okay, properties. Let's see if it stays there. Nope, there it goes again, dropping as I talk. Which is... Now the question is, what is changing the sound? That's the question. Maybe this is it? Let's try this. Okay, so we're going to try talking for a minute. Nope, there it goes again. Properties, advanced, levels. Yeah, I don't know why it's doing what it's doing here. Set up microphone. Other. Next. After reading this, Peter dictates to his computer. He prefers it to typing and particularly prefers it to pen and paper. Okay, cool. Computer did not hear me very clearly. Why didn't the computer hear me very? Could it be because the computer keeps fucking with my sound? Let's see if that did anything. Okay, so are you going to stay where... Nope, there you go again. Where did I find that? Oh, that's about telephone calls. Don't care about that. Hold on. Okay. So now you should be able to hear me again, but still quiet because the levels have gone all the way down to 56. I could try updating the driver, I guess. Is there an update for the driver? Let's open the Roadcaster shit. Do, 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 do. Nope, my firmware is up to date. I am using a third-party audio mixer. I'm using a Roadcaster. The Roadcaster software. But that doesn't help. And OBS. Let's try this. Hold on, I'm going to mute the audio. Or the desktop audio, anyway. The annoying thing is it was doing just fine for like 2 weeks. And then it just randomly starts doing this shit. Come on, just tell me how to do the thing. I hate troubleshooting on stream. I don't have that. Okay. Well, that doesn't exist on my computer. I mean, I would hope that the people who watch me by now realize that I want them to have the best possible experience. And so if this is the time that I can fix it, this is when I'm going to fix it. But I don't understand why it's. Where's this? No, that's something else. Not going to help. HD audio device driver associated with this item. Date. It says I should be able to troubleshoot it. Let's try that. Sometimes to get an engine running right, you have to tune it while it's running. You're not wrong. Yep, that. Well, that didn't find any problems, so that was pointless. That makes no sense. Okay, so maybe let's look at this. Let's turn off things that don't need access to my microphone. Okay, well, I just turned off a whole bunch, but that's not going to help. That's also not going to help. Nope. Okay, guys, I'm going to warn you right now. Watch your ears. I'm going to do something. And if I don't want to, if you're wearing headsets or something, please, for the love of God, take them off. I don't want to damage anybody's hearing because I'm about to do something. This is your final warning. Test, test. God, I hope I didn't hurt anybody. Why are you doing this? You pain in my ass. Is it the sound spiking that does it? If I talk louder, will it happen? Apparently not, no. What if I do this? Does that have any effect? Does that have any effect at all? Maybe I just need to do it this way. Hold on. What does that do? Does that help at all? Let's see here. Hold on. Okay. Checking, checking, checking. All right. Let me know how it sounds at the moment. If you could, please. Is it going to work its way down over time? That's the question. You should be safe to put your headset back on or whatever you're doing. I don't know which program is causing the problem. It might be, maybe OBS is the problem. Let's see. Change the on PC. Let's try this. Oh, goody. Oh, there's no surprise there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that Windows. Okay. Yeah. Yep. I don't think so, but I'm trying to fix it. Unfortunately, he's described my problem, but he doesn't really give me a good fix for the problem. That's really irritating. Nope, that's not going to help. I really don't care. Come on. Well, maybe I try that. Yeah, no, that looks right. I don't want to boost it by any decibels. That's part of the problem. I just want it to stay at the regular thing. I don't know why that's such a problem. Can anybody explain why that's such a problem? I am just going to strangle somebody. Okay, how do I sound right now? Anybody listening? Can you hear me? Am I still here? I'm talking. I don't know if I'm still here or not. I know the problem's Microsoft. I don't know why the problem's Microsoft. That's what bothers me. Is it at an uncomfortable level? Do I need to turn it up? I think I might temporarily have has normalized. Okay, good. I think I understand what the problem is. It still irritates me. Sorry, you probably turned down for a second there. But it's a very, very irritating thing. So I'll have to figure that out later. Thank you guys for letting me know and helping out, getting it fixed, sticking with me. Yeah. Yeah, it's something to do with Rodecaster. or not Roadcaster. It's actually something to do with OBS. So the problem is OBS apparently wants to, because I adjusted the slider in OBS a little, it wanted to adjust it in the back end on, I need to figure out if there's a way to make sure that the Roadcaster software is controlling it as opposed to OBS. That might help in the future. All right, let's get back to the book. Again, thank you guys for sticking with me and helping me troubleshoot. I appreciate it. There needs to be a way to assign what software's taking control. You know, I still like OBS better than all the other softwares just because it gives me so much control. Oh, my mug must be out of battery. All right. You're not wrong, Engel. You're not wrong. If somebody can come up with something like OBS but works better, I'd probably try it. All right, where were we anyway? Vast knowledge. Oh, okay. I know we talked about that. Here we go. Though never becoming truly proficient in these processes, he did manage to achieve a series of monstrous and portentous dreams. Honestly, I'll take something that works half the time with options I like over something that has no... Exactly, Engel, and I'm the same way. I am definitely the same way. I might have to figure out a thing or two, but we've only got how many pages we got left? Where are we? Got like 12 pages left, so we'll finish this off. Where was I? Though never becoming truly proficient in these processes, he did manage to achieve a series of monstrous and portentous dreams, which he believed included some elements of actual projection into Nakai, dreams which greatly shocked and perturbed the leaders of Yig and Tulu worship when he related them, and which he was advised by friends to conceal rather than exploit. In time, those dreams became very frequent and maddening, containing things which he dared not record in his main manuscript, but of which he prepared a special record for the benefit of certain learned men in Sath. It may have been unfortunate, or it may have been mercifully fortunate, that Zamakona practiced so many tenances and reserved so many themes and descriptions for subsidiary manuscripts. The main document leaves one to guess much about the detailed manners, customs, thoughts, language, and histories of Kinyan, as well as to form any adequate picture of the visual aspect and daily life of Sath. One is left puzzled, too, about the real motivations of the people, their strange passivity and craven unwarlikeness, and their almost cringing fear of the outer world despite their possession of atomic and dematerializing powers, which would have made them unconquerable had they taken the trouble to organize armies in the old days. It was evident that Kinyan was far along in its decadence, reacting with mixed apathy and hysteria against the standardized and time-tabled life of stultifying regularity which machinery had brought it during its middle period. Even the grotesque and repulsive customs and modes of thought and feeling can be traced to this source. For in his historical research, Zamacona found evidence of bygone eras in which Kenyan had held ideas much like those of classic and Renaissance outer world, and had possessed a national character and art full of what Europeans regarded as dignity, kindness, and nobility. The more Zamacona studied these things, the more apprehensive about the future he became, because he saw that the omnipresent, moral and intellectual disintegration was tremendously deep-seated and ominously accelerating movement. Even during his stay, the signs of decay multiplied. Rationalism degenerated more and more into fanatical, orgastic superstition, centering in a lavish adoration of the magnetic Tulu metal, and tolerance steadily dissolved into a series of frenzied hatreds, especially towards the outer world of which the scholars were learning so much from him. At times he almost feared the people might someday lose their age-long apathy and brokenness and turn like desperate rats among the unknown lands above them. Against the unknown lands above them, sweeping all before them by virtue of their singular and still remembered scientific powers. But for the present they fought their boredom and sense of emptiness in other ways, multiplying their hideous emotional outlets and increasing the mad grotesqueness and abnormality of their diversions. The arenas of Sath must have been accursed and unthinkable places. Zamacona never went near them, and what they would be in another country or even another decade he did not dare to think. Century or another decade. The pious Spaniard crossed himself and counted his beads more often than usual in those days. In the year 1545, as he reckoned it, Zamacona began what might well be accepted as his final series of attempts to leave Kenyan. His fresh opportunity came from an unexpected source. A female of his affection group who conceived for him a curious individual infatuation based on some hereditary memory of the days of monogamous wedlock in Sath. Over this female, a noblewoman of moderate beauty and of at least average intelligence named Zealia Bishop, Zamacona acquired the most extraordinary influence, finally indulging her to help him in an escape, under the promise that he would let her accompany him. Chance proved a great factor, of course, in the events, for Zealia Bishop came of a primordial family of gate lords, who had retained oral traditions of at least one passage to the outer world, which the massed people had forgotten even at the time of the great closing. A passage to a mound on the level plains of earth, which had, in consequence, never been sealed up or guarded. She explained that the primordial gate lords were not guards or sentries, but merely ceremonial and economic proprietors, half feudal and half baronial in status, of an era preceding the severance of surface relations. Her own family had been so reduced at the time of the closing that their gate had been wholly overlooked, and they had ever afterwards preserved the secret of its existence as a sort of hereditary secret, a source of pride and of a sense of reserved power to offset the feeling of vanished wealth and influence which so constantly irritated them. Zamacona, now working feverishly to get his manuscript into final form in case anything should happen to him, decided to take with him on his outward journey only 5 beast lords of unalloyed gold in the form of small ingots used for minor decorations, enough, he calculated, to make him a personage of unlimited power in his own world. He had become somewhat hardened to the sight of the monstrous Gnyanyot during his 4 years of residence in Sath, hence did not shrink from using the creatures, yet resolved to kill and bury them, and cache the gold as soon as he reached the outer world, since he knew that even a glimpse of the things would drive any ordinary Indian mad. Later, he could arrange for a suitable expedition to transport the treasure to Mexico. Tlabyub he would perhaps allow to share his fortunes, for she was by no means unattractive, although possibly he would arrange for her to sojourn among the Plains Indians, since he was not over-anxious to preserve links with the manner of life in South. For a wife, of course, he would choose a lady of Spain, or at worst, an Indian princess of normal outward descent and a regular and approved past. But for the present, Tlabyub must be used as a guide. The manuscript he would carry on his own person, encased in a book cylinder of the sacred and magnetic Tulu metal. The exposition itself is described in the addendum to Zamacona's manuscript, written later and in a hand showing signs of nervous strain. It set out amidst the most careful precautions, choosing a rest period and proceeding as far as possible along the faintly lighted passages beneath the city. Zamacona and Tlabyub, disguised in slaves' garments, bearing provision knapsacks, and leading the 5 laden beasts on foot, were readily taken for commonplace workers, and they clung as long as possible to the subterranean way, using a long and little frequented branch which had formerly conducted the mechanical transports to the now ruined suburb of Lethaw. Amidst the ruins of Lethaw, they came to the surface, thereafter passing as rapidly as possible over the deserted blue-litten plain of Nith towards the Gronyan range of low hills. There, amidst the tangled underbrush, Tlabyub found the long disused and half-fabulous entrance to the forgotten tunnel, a thing she had seen but once before, eons in the past, when her father had taken her thither to shew her this monument to their family pride. It was hard work getting the laden Yalth to scrape through the obstructing vines and briars, and one of them displayed a rebelliousness destined to bear dire consequences, bolting away from the party and loping back towards Sath on its detestable pads, golden burden and all. It was nightmare work, burrowing by the light of the blue ray torches upward, downward, forward, and upward again, through a dark, choked tunnel that no foot had trodden since the ages before the sinking of Atlantis, and at one point Tlabyub had to practice the fearsome art of dematerialization on herself, Zamacona, and the laden beasts, in order to pass a point wholly clogged by shifting earth strata. It was a terrible experience for Zamacona, for although he had often witnessed dematerialization in others, and even practiced it himself to the extent of dream projection, he had never been fully subjected to it before. But Tlabyub was skilled in the arts of Kinyan, and accomplished the double metamorphosis in perfect safety. Thereafter, they resumed the hideous burrowing through the stalactited crypts of horror, where the monstrous carvings leered at every turn, alternately camping and advancing for a period which Zamacona reckoned about 3 days, but which was probably less. At last they came to a very narrow place where the natural or only slightly hewn cave walls gave place to walls of wholly artificial masonry, carved into terrible bas-reliefs. These walls, after about a mile of steep ascent, ended with a pair of vast niches, one on each side, in which monstrous nitro-encrusted images of Yig and Tulu squatted, glaring at each other across the passage as they had glared since the earliest youth of the human world. At this point, the passage opened into a prodigious, vaulted, and circular chamber of human construction, wholly covered with horrible carvings, and revealing at the farther end an arched passageway with the foot of the flight of steps. Tlabyub knew from family tales that this must be very near the earth's surface, but she could not tell just how near. Here the party camped for what they meant to be their last rest period in the subterranean world. It must have been hours later that the clank of metal and the padding of beasts' feet wakened Zamacona and Tlabyub. A bluish glare was spreading from the narrow passage between the images of Yig and Tulu, and in an instant the truth was obvious. An alarm had been given in Sath, as was later revealed by the turning Gyagyoth, had come to arrest the fugitives. Resistance was clearly useless, and none was offered. The party of 12 beast riders proved studiously polite, and the return commenced with almost without a word or thought message on either side. It was an ominous and depressing journey, and the ordeal of dematerialization and rematerialization at the choked place was all the more terrible because of the lack of that hope and expectancy which had palliated the process on the outward trip. Zamacona heard his captors discussing the imminent clearing of this choke point by intensive radiations, since henceforth sentries must be maintained at the hitherto unknown outer portal. It would not do to let outsiders get within the passage, for then any who might escape without due treatment would have a hint of the vastness of the inner world, and would perhaps be curious enough to return in greater strength. As with the other passages since Zamacona's coming, sentries must be stationed all along, as far as the very outermost gate, sentries drawn from amongst all the slaves, the dead alive, Yimibirb, or the class of discredited freemen. With the overrunning of the American plains by thousands of Europeans, as the Spaniard had predicted, every passage was a potential source of danger, and must be rigorously guarded until the technologies of Seth could spare the energy to prepare an ultimate and entrance-hiding obliteration, as they had done for many passages in earlier and more vigorous times. Zamacona were tried before 3 Ganyang of the Supreme Tribunal in the Gold and Copper Palace behind the gardened and fountained park, and the Spaniard was given his liberty because of the vital outer world information he still had to impart. He was told to return to his apartment and to his affection group, taking up his life as before, and continue to meet deputations of scholars according to the latest schedule he had been following. No restrictions would be imposed upon him so long as he might remain peacefully in Kinyan, but it was intimated that such leniency would not be repeated after another attempt at escape. Zamacona had felt that there was an element of irony in the parting words of the chief Ngag, an assurance that all of his Gyanyoth, including the one which had rebelled, would be returned to him. The fate of Tlabyub was less happy. There being no object in retaining her, and her ancient Sethic lineage giving her act a greater aspect of treason than Zamacona's had possessed, she was ordered to be delivered to the curious diversions of the amphitheater, and afterward, in a somewhat mutilated and half-dematerialized form, to be given the function of a Yamab-Bib, or animated corpse slave, and stationed among the sentries guarding the passage whose existence she had betrayed. Zamacona soon heard, not without many pangs of regret he could scarcely have anticipated, that poor Tlabyub had emerged from the arena in a headless and otherwise incomplete state, and had been set as an outermost guard upon the mound in which the passage had been found to terminate. She was, he was told, a night sentinel, whose automatic duty it was to warn off all comers with a torch, sending down reports to a small garrison of 12 dead slaves, Yimabib, and 6 living but partly dematerialized freemen in the vaulted, circular chamber, if the approachers did not heed her warning. She worked, he was told, in conjunction with a day sentinel, a living freeman who chose this post in preference to other forms of discipline for other offenses against the state. Zamacona, of course, had long known that most of the chief gate sentries were such decredited freemen. It was now made plain to him, though indirectly, that his own penalty for another escape attempt would be his service at a gate entry, but in the form of a dead-alive Yambib slave. And after amphitheater treatment even more picturesque than that which Tlabyub was reported to have undergone. It was intimated that he, or parts of him, would be reanimated to guard some inner section of the passage, within sight of others, where his abridged person might serve as a permanent symbol of the rewards of treason. But, his informants always added, it was, of course, inconceivable that he would ever court such a fate, so long as he remained peaceably in Kinyan. He would continue to be a free, privileged, and respected personage. Yet in the end, Panfilio de Zagamacona did court the fate so direfully hinted to him. True, he did not really expect to encounter it, but the nervous latter part of his manuscript makes it clear that he was prepared to face its possibility. What gave him a final hope of a scatheless escape from Kinyan was his growing mastery of the art of dematerialization. Having studied it for years, and having learned still more from the 2 instances in which he had been subjected to it, he now felt incredibly able to use it independently and effectively. The manuscript records several notable experiments in this art, minor successes accomplished in his apartment, and reflects Zamacona's hope that he might soon be able to assume the spectral form in full, attaining complete invisibility and preserving that condition as long as he wished. Once he reached this stage, he argued, the outward way lay open to him. Of course, he could not bear away any gold, but mere escape was enough. He would, though, dematerialize and carry away with him his manuscript in the Tulu metal cylinder, even though it cost additional effort, for this record and proof must reach the outer world at all hazards. He now knew the passage to follow, and if he could thread it in an atom-scattered status, he did not see how any person or force could detect or stop him. The only trouble would be if he failed to maintain his spectral condition at all times. That was the one ever-present peril, as he had learned from his experiments. But must one not always risk death and worse in a life of adventure? Zamacona was a gentleman of old Spain, of the blood that faced the unknown and carved out half the civilization of the New World. For many nights, after his ultimate resolution, Zamacona prayed to Saint Pamphilus and other guardian saints and counted the beads of his rosary. The last entry in his manuscript, which towards the end took form of a diary more and more, was merely a single sentence: Es más tarde de lo que pensaba, tengo que marcharme. It is later than I thought. I must go. After that, only silence and conjecture, and such evidence as the presence of the manuscript itself and what the manuscript could lead to might provide. When I looked up from my half-stupefied reading and note-taking, the morning sun was high in the heavens. The electric bulb was still burning, but such things of the real world, the modern outer world, were far from my whirling brain. I knew it was in my room at Clyde Compton's at Bingor. But upon what monstrous vista had I stumbled? Was this thing a hoax or a chronicle of madness? If a hoax, was it a jest of the 16th century or of today? The manuscript's age looked appallingly genuine to my not wholly unpracticed eyes, and the problem presented by the strange metal cylinder I dared not even think about. Moreover, what a monstrously exact explanation it gave of all the baffling phenomena of the Mound, of the seeming meaningless and paradoxical actions of binaural and nocturnal ghosts, and of the queer cases of madness and disappearance. It was even an accursedly plausible explanation, evilly consistent, if one could adopt the incredible. It must be a shocking hoax devised by someone who knew all the lore of the Mound. There was even a hint of social satire in the account of that unbelievable netherworld of horror and decay. Surely this was the clever forgery of some learned cynic, something like the leaden crosses in New Mexico, which a jester once planted and pretended to discover as a relic of some forgotten Dark Age colony from Europe. Upon going down to breakfast, I hardly knew what to tell Compton and his mother, as well as the curious callers who had already begun to arrive. Still in a daze, I cut the Gordian knot by giving a few points from the notes I had made, mumbling my belief that the thing was a subtle and ingenious fraud, left there by some previous explorer of the Mound. a belief which everybody seemed to concur with when I told of the substance of the manuscript. It was curious how all that breakfast group, all the others in Bringer to whom the discussion was repeated, seemed to find a great clearing of the atmosphere and the notion that somebody was playing a joke on somebody. For the time, we all forgot that the known, recent history of the Mound presented mysteries as strange as any in the manuscript, and as far from acceptable solution as ever. The fears and doubts began to return when I asked for volunteers to visit the Mound with me. I wanted a larger excavating party, but the idea of going to that uncomfortable place seemed no more attractive to the people of Binger than it had seemed the previous day. I felt myself a mounting horror upon looking towards the Mound and glimpsing the moving speck which I knew was the daylight sentinel. For in spite of all my skepticism, the morbidities of that manuscript stuck by me and gave everything connected with the place a new, monstrous significance. I absolutely lacked the resolution to look at the moving speck with my binoculars. Instead, I set out with the kind of bravado we display in nightmares. When we know we are dreaming, we plunge desperately into the still thicker horrors. I'm not reading. I'm recalling from memory. Will we knowing... Oh, that scared me for a second. Where was I? Yes, I am quite impressive. Let's see here. When, knowing we are dreaming, we plunge desperately into still thicker horrors for the sake of having the whole thing over the sooner. My pick and shovel were already out there, so I had only my handbag of smaller paraphernalia to take. Into this I put the strange cylinder and its contents, feeling vaguely that I might possibly find something worth checking up with. Some part of the green-lettered Spanish text. Even a clever hoax might be founded on some actual attribute of the Mound which a former explorer had discovered. And that magnetic metal was damnably odd. Grey Eagle's cryptic talisman still hung from its leather cord around my neck. I did not look very sharply at the Mound as I walked to it, but when I reached it, there was nobody in sight. Repeating my upward scramble of the previous day, I was troubled by thoughts of what might lie close at hand if, by any miracle, any part of the manuscript were actually half true. In such a case, I could not help reflecting the hypothetical Spaniard Zamacona must have barely reached the outer world when overtaken by some disaster, perhaps an involuntary rematerialization. He would, naturally in that event, have been seized by whichever sentry happened to be on duty at the time, either the discredited freeman or, as a matter of supreme irony, the very Zealia Bishop who had planned and aided his first attempt at escape. And in the ensuing struggle, the cylinder with the manuscript might well have been dropped on the Mound's summit to be neglected and gradually buried for nearly 4 centuries. But, I added as I climbed over the crest, one must think of extravagant things like that. Still, if there were anything in the tale, it must have been a monstrous fate which Zamacona had been dragged back to. The amphitheater, mutilation, duties somewhere in the dank, nitrous tunnels as a dead-alive slave, a maimed corpse fragment as an automatic interior sentry. It was a very real shock which chased this morbid speculation from my head, for upon glancing around the elliptical summit, I saw at once my pick and shovel had been stolen. This was a highly provoking and disconcerting development. Baffling, too, in view of the seeming reluctance of all Bamberger folk to visit the Mound. Was the reluctance a pretend thing, and had the jokers of the village been chuckling over my coming discomfiture as they solemnly saw me off 10 minutes before? Took out my binoculars and scanned the gaping crowd at the end of the village. No, they did not seem to be looking for any comic climax. Yet, was not the whole affair at the bottom a colossal joke in which all the villagers and reservation people were concerned? Legends, manuscripts, cylinder and all. I thought of how I had seen the sentry from a distance, and then found him unaccountably vanished. Thought also of the conduct of old Grey Eagle, of the speech and expressionism of Compton and his mother, and the unmistakable fright of most of the Binger people. On the whole, it could not very well be a village-wide joke. The fear and the problem were surely real, though obviously there were one or two jesting daredevils in Binger who had stolen out to the mound and made off with the tools I had left. Everything else on the mound was as I had left it. Brush cut by my machete, slight bowl-like depression towards the north end, and the hole I had made with my trench knife in digging up the magnetism-revealed cylinder. Deeming it too great a concession to the unknown jokers to return to Binger for another pick and shovel, I resolved to carry out my program as best I could with the machete and trench knife in my handbag. So, extracting these, I set to work excavating the bowl-like depression which my eyes had picked as the possible site of a former entrance to the mound. Do-do-do-do-do. As I proceeded, I felt again the suggestion of a sudden wind blowing against me which I had noticed the day before. A suggestion which seemed stronger and still more reminiscent of unseen, formless, opposing hands laid on my wrists as I cut deeper and deeper through the root-entangled red soil and reached the exotic black loam beneath. The talisman around my neck appeared to twitch oddly in the breeze, not in any one direction, as when attracted by the buried cylinder, but vaguely and diffusely, in a matter wholly unaccountable. Then, quite without warning, the black, root-worn earth beneath my feet began to sink crackingly, while I heard a faint sound of sifting, falling matter far below me. The obstructing wind or forces or hands now seemed to be operating the very seat of the sinking, and I felt that they aided me by pushing as I leapt back out of the hole to avoid being involved in any cave-in. Bending down over the brink and hacking at the mold-caked root tangle with my machete, I felt that they were against me again, but at no time were they strong enough to stop my work. The more roots I severed, the more falling matter I heard below. Finally, a hole began to deepen of itself towards the center, and I saw that the earth was sifting down into some large cavity beneath, so as to leave a good-sized aperture when the roots that had bound it were gone. A few more hacks of the machete did the trick, and with the parting cave-in and uprush of curiously chilled and alien air, the last barrier gave way. Under the morning sun yawned a huge opening at least 3 feet square, eschewing the top of a flight of stone steps down which the loose earth of the collapse was still sliding. My quest had come to something at last, with an elation of accomplishment almost overbalancing fear for the nonce. I replaced the trench knife and machete in my handbag, took out my powerful electric torch, and prepared for a triumphant, lone, and utterly rash invasion of the fabulous netherworld I had uncovered. It was rather hard getting down the first few steps, both because of the fallen earth which had choked them, and because of the sinister uppushing of a cold wind from below. The talisman around my neck swayed curiously, and I began to regret the disappearing square of daylight above me. The electric torch shewed dank, water-stained and salt-encrusted walls fashioned of huge basalt blocks, and now and then I thought I descried some trace of carving beneath the nitrous deposits. I gripped my handbag more tightly and was glad of the comfort weighing of the sheriff's heavy revolver in my right-hand coat pocket. After a time, the passage began to wind this way and that. and the staircase became free from obstructions. Carvings on the wall were now definitely traceable, and I shuddered when I saw how clearly the grotesque figures resembled the monstrous bas-reliefs on the cylinder I had found. Winds and forces continued to blow malevolently against me, and at one or two bends, I half fancied the torch gave a glimpse of thin, transparent shapes, not unlike the sentinel on the mound as my binoculars had shewed him. It would not do to let my nerves get the better at me at this very outset of what would surely be a trying experience, and the most important archaeological feat of my career. But I wish I had not stopped at just that place, for the act fixed my attention on something profoundly disturbing. It was only a small object lying close to the wall on one of the steps below me, but that object was such to put my reason to a severe test and bring up a line of the most alarming speculations. That the opening above me had been closed against all material forms for generations was utterly obvious from the growth of shrub roots and accumulations of drifting soil, yet the object before me was most distinctly not generations old. For it was an electric torch, much like the one I now carried, warped and encrusted in the tomb-like dampness, but nonetheless perfectly unmistakable. I descended a few steps and picked it up, wiping off the evil deposits on my rough coat. One of the nickel bands bore an engraved name and address, and I recognized it with a start the moment I made it out. It read Jas C. Williams, 17 Trowbridge Street, Cambridge, Mass. I knew it had belonged to one of the two daring college instructors who had disappeared on June 28, 1915, only 13 years ago. And yet I had just broken through the sod of centuries. How had the thing got there? Another entrance? Or was there something after all in this mad idea of dematerialization and rematerialization? Doubt and horror grew upon me as I wound still farther down the seemingly endless staircase. Would the thing never stop? The carvings grew more and more distinct, and assumed a narrative, pictorial quality, which brought me close to panic as I recognized many unmistakable correspondences with the history of Kinyen as sketched in the manuscript now resting in my handbag. For the first time, I began to seriously question the wisdom of my descent, and to wonder whether I had not better return to the upper air before I came upon something which would never let me return as a sane man. But I did not hesitate for long, for as a Virginian, I felt the blood of ancestral fighters and gentlemen adventurers pounding a protest against retreat from any peril known or unknown. My descent became swifter rather than slower, and I avoided studying the terrible bas-relief and intaglios that had unnerved me. All at once I saw an arched opening ahead, and realized the prodigious staircase had ended at last. Prodigious staircase had ended at last. But with that realization came horror in mounting magnitude, for before me there yawned a vast, vaulted crypt of all too familiar outline, a great circular space answering in every least particular to the carving-lined chamber described in Zamakona's manuscript. It was indeed the place. There could be no mistake. And if any room for doubt yet remained, that room was abolished by what I saw directly across the great vault. It was a second arched opening, commencing a large, narrow passage and having at its mouth two huge opposite niches, bearing loathsome and titanic images of shockingly familiar pattern. It was the dark, unclean Yig and hideous Tulu squatted eternally, glaring at each other across the passage as they had glared since the earliest youth of the human world. From this point onward, I ask no credence for what I tell, for what I think I saw. It is too utterly unnatural, too utterly monstrous and incredible, to be any part of sane human experience or objective reality. My torch, though casting a powerful beam ahead, naturally could not furnish any general illumination of the Cyclopean crypt. So now I began moving about to explore the gigantic walls little by little, and as I did so, I saw to my horror that the space was by no means vacant. but was instead littered with odd furniture and utensils, and heaps of packages which bespoke a populous recent occupancy. No nitrous relics of the past, but queerly shaped objects and supplies in modern, everyday use. As my torch rested on each article or group of articles, however, the distinctness of the outlines soon began to grow blurred, until in the end I could scarcely tell whether the things belonged to the realm of matter or to the realm of spirit. All this while the adverse winds blew against me with increasing fury, and the unseen hands plucked malevolently at me and snatched at the strange magnetic talisman I wore. Wild conceits surged through my mind. I thought of the manuscript and what it said about the garrison stationed in this place. 12 dead slave Yumembe and 6 living but partially dematerialized freemen. That was in 1545, 383 years ago. What since then? Zemakona had predicted change, subtle discrimination, more dematerialization, weaker and rinker. Was it Grey Eagle's talisman that held them at bay? Their sacred Tulu metal? And were they feebly trying to pluck it off so that they might do to me what they had done to those who had come before? It occurred to me with shuddering force that I was building my speculation out of a full belief in the Zamakona manuscript. This must not be. I must get a grip on myself. But curse it, every time I tried to get a grip, I saw some fresh sight to shatter my poise still further. This time, just as my willpower was driving the half-seen paraphernalia into obscurity, my glance and torch beam had to light on 2 things of very different nature. 2 things of the eminently real, insane world, yet they did more to unseat my shaky reason than anything I had seen before. Because I knew what they were, and knew how profoundly, in the course of nature, they ought not to be there. They were my own missing pick and shovel, side by side, leaning against the blasphemously carved wall of that hellish crypt. God in heavens, and I had babbled to myself about daring jokers from Binger. That was the last straw. After that, cursed hypnotism of the manuscript got at me, and I actually saw the half-transparent shapes of the things that were pushing and plucking and pushing and plucking, those leprous paleogen things, with something of humanity still clinging to them, the complete forms, and the forms that were morbidly and perversely incomplete. All these hideous and other entities. The 4-footed blasphemies, with ape-like face and projecting horns. Not a sound so far in all that nitrous hell of an inner earth. Then there was a sound, a flopping, padding, dull, advancing sound, which heralded beyond question as being as structurally material as the pickaxe and the shovel, something wholly unlike the shadow shapes that ringed me in, yet equally remote from any sort of life as life is understood on the earth's wholesome surface. My shattered brain tried to prepare for what was coming, but could not frame any adequate image. I could only say over and over to myself, it is the abyss, but it is not dematerialized. The padding grew more distinct, and from the mechanical cast of tread, I knew it was a dead thing that stalked the darkness. Then, oh God, I saw it in the full beam of my torch, saw it framed like a sentinel in the narrow passage between the nightmare idols of the serpent Yig and the octopus Tulu. Let me collect myself enough to hint what I saw, to explain why I dropped my torch and handbag and fled empty-handed into the utter blackness, wrapped in a merciful unconsciousness which did not wear off until the sun and distant yelling and shouting from the village roused me as I lay gasping on the top of the accursed mound. I do not yet know what guided me again to the earth's surface. I only know that watchers in Binger saw me stagger up into sight 3 hours after I had vanished, saw me lurch up and fall flat on the ground as if struck by a bullet. None of them dared come out and help me, but they knew I must be in a bad state, so tried to rouse me as best they could by yelling in chorus and firing off revolvers. It worked in the end. And when I came to, I almost rolled down the side of the mound in my eagerness to get away from the black aperture, which still yawned open. My torch and tools and the handbag with the manuscript were all down there, but it's easy to see why neither I nor anyone else ever went after them. When I staggered across the plain into the village, I dared not tell them what I had seen. Only muttered vague things about carvings and statues and snakes and shaken nerves, and I did not faint again until someone mentioned that the ghost sentinel had reappeared about the time I had staggered halfway back to town. I left Binger that evening, and have never been there since, though they tell me the ghosts still appear on the mound as usual. But I have resolved to hint here at last what I dared not hint to the people of Binger on that terrible August afternoon. I don't know yet just how I can go about it. And if in the end you think my reticence strange, just remember to imagine such horror is one thing, but to see it is another thing. I saw it, and I think you'll recall my citing earlier in this tale, the case of a bright young man named Heaton, who went out to that mound one day in 1891 and came back at night as the village idiot, babbling for 8 years about horrors and then dying in an epileptic fit. What he used to keep moaning was, that white man, my God, what they did to him. Well, I saw the same thing that poor Heaton saw, and I saw it after reading the manuscript, so I know more of its history than he did. That makes it worse, for I know all that it implies, and all that must still be brooding and festering and waiting down there. I told you it had padded mechanically towards me out of the narrow passage, and had stood sentry-like at the entrance between the frightful Adolia of Yig and Tulu, that it was very natural and inevitable, because the thing was a sentry. It had been made a sentry for punishment, and it was quite dead, besides lacking a head, arms, lower legs, and other customary parts of the human being. Yes, it had been a very human being once, and what's more, it had been white. Very obviously, if that manuscript was true, as I think it was. This being had been used for the diversions of the amphitheater before its life had become wholly extinct and supplanted by automatic impulses controlled from outside. On its white and only slightly hairy chest, some letters had been gashed or branded. I had not stopped to investigate, but had merely noticed that they were in an awkward and fumbling Spanish. An awkward Spanish implying a kind of ironic use of the language by an alien inscriber familiar neither with the idiom nor with the Roman letters used to record it. The inscription had read, Secuestrado a la voluntad de Zianeda in el cupero de capitalo de Talub, seized by the will of Kenyam in the headless body of Talabia. And that is the end. Interesting story. I do like how they all seem to connect back on each other. I don't know what y'all think. For those of you who've been here for other readings, there was definite references regarding... Yig obviously came up previously. What else was I just thinking about? Oh crap, I forgot what the other... Well, that's what I was thinking about. We read, The Secret City, I believe it's called, a little bit back. And that one talked about a fresco of quadrupedal lizards, which obviously they must have meant those from Yoth. So, that's really interesting to me. Whew. I gotta start doing breathing exercises again. I've forgotten how to breathe, if that makes sense. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. Next week, we will start reading At the Mountains of Madness, which should be a lot of fun. It's a very interesting story for those of you who haven't heard it. What else was I going to think? The 23rd of February will be the very first members stream. So stop by for that. I will post in the community tab on YouTube about what game we might play or games. So if there's something you want to participate in, people who are at the zealot, not a zealot level, have the option of joining first. Then of course we will go with what is it, not a cultist, and then if there's room, of course, the not an initiates. But everybody will be able to come to the member stream. I thought about it and decided that it was dumb to do it otherwise, so made me feel wrong. But yeah, tomorrow night, I don't know if I'll play a different game or if I'll talk sheep into playing some Pal World with me, but we'll see when that comes. I think that covers everything. You guys, thank you so much for bearing with me. Thank you for helping me with the troubleshooting and bearing with me through that. I'm probably going to spend some time after I get off and see if I can find another way to fix that, because fuck that noise. But y'all have a very good afternoon, good evening, good night. I'll catch you later. Sweet dreams. I suppose I could use my end screen, huh? Bye.